Welcome back to another video on Git. In this video, I want you to understand what a remote is, because until now, we worked only with a local repository, not shared with anyone. Everything is happening on my local machine and on a folder. Just a reminder, remember, when you issue a git init command, you are initting a special folder called .git that contains all Git database. Let's try to understand how can I backup my code. So I'm working in this folder, I'm working with code, and I don't want to lose my history, everything. If you follow what I told you in the previous video, you can simply backup the .git folder or the entire folder, but it is enough backupping this .git folder. You can simply copy onto another folder of your hard disk. But there is a much more better way to communicate, to backup and communicate with others, and it's called a remote. Let's try to understand what a remote is. Now, I'm taking a folder on my computer that is shared with other computer on the network, and I can create a new folder, and I call it git share. And I create that folder, okay? Now that folder is empty. And I want to use that folder as a backup, as a remote point where I can copy my Git internal database. For doing this, there's a much better way than simply create a copy command with shell that copy .git inside this folder. The better way is called using native remote support for Git. So I can right-click, open in terminal. So now I have a terminal and I can issue git init --bear. Anything git with the --bear option create a really different result in my folder. Instead of having a .git folder where where the database of Git resides and having the working folder, I'm now in the folder and it contains the same set of folder that the .git folder contains. So the git init --bear, it's an important command because it creates a folder with only the content of the database. And you're not supposed to work with this folder. So if I open code inside this other folder, okay, and I'm going to open a terminal, I can issue a git log. And it works, but it tells you that you don't have any commits. But if I issue git status, it tells me that I cannot run this operation because it must be run in a workery. That's because, as you see, I have not a .git folder. Everything is in the root folder. So the init --bear create a Git repository inside the database. Not supposed to work with this folder directly, but it's used to share stuff. Let's see how. Okay, I'm back on my original repository, and I can add a remote with this command, git remote add. The name of the remote, for now use the origin, is such, it's a default for identifying the main remote of the repository, and then file, and I simply specify the folder where I've previously run git init --bear. If I press enter, nothing happens. I can issue a git remote -v. It tells me all the remotes I've configured. For now, let's just ignore the fact that we have two identical paths, one with fetch and one with push. But it is important that I've specified the origin as a simple folder in my computer or in a network share where I previously ran git init --bear. And now I can issue a git push origin master. And it reads like this: git push all my modification onto origin, taking the master branch. So Git is going to take the pointer in the master file. It finds the commit, and then from that commit, it walks back until it finds the origin of the repository, and it pushes the commit into the origin. But what really is happening? Well, it's simple. If you remember how Git works, all the objects have the file name equal to the hash of the content. So there's no risk in overwriting with a same name of the file, different content. So git push, it simply lists all the commits reachable from the master and you simply copy this Git object inside the other repository bear. So if I come back in my other repository, here I am, I can do a git log. And now you can verify that even if I'm in the git share, the repository where I issue the git init -- bear, I have actually all the object copied by the other repository. So git push, it's simply, for now, it's simply let's push all the modification I have, let's push all the .object inside a remote and nothing else. Remote, it's not a server, so there's no magic protocol, there's no service running. A remote for Git is just a storage where Git can move internal database, nothing else. As you saw in this video, I've simply created a new folder in my computer. I simply run git bear -- init. There's no server running, there's no daemon running, and I added the remote and push the data inside that folder. Now, let's see how I can work with another computer using that remote as point where I can share things with other member of the team. Now, I'm on a Windows machine, so it is easy to understand that I'm on a different box because it's a different operating system. And I verify that I indeed be able to reach the network share on the other machine, and I can verify that I'm looking at a Git database. So that's the simple shared folder where I've run init -- bear, and then I used to remote, and I use as remote on the other repository, and where I indeed pushed some modification, okay? Now I can go to any folder on my Windows machine, okay? It's an empty folder, and I can start Visual Studio Code and working with this folder. So there's no Git, there's no nothing, so I can start running Git init. I don't want to run -- bear because it is going to be a real folder where I want to work. As I run git init, this standard .git folder appears. Now it's time to get data from the remote. The syntax is really similar to the one used in Linux. It's the command line is the same. Git remote add origin, and I simply specify the network share that is containing my git bear repository. Okay, I can use git remote --vu, just verifying that I've indeed created a repository with an origin, and now I can issue another command, git fetch origin. Or you can issue a git fetch, because if the origin is the only repository, it's standard. Git understand that it's going to fetch data from that repository. So git fetch is doing a lot of things, but basically it fetching all the objects from the internal Git database pointed by that origin, and it fetched also the branches that you find in the other repository. So if you look at refs, you have heads and you have no heads. So this means you still have no branch in your local repository. But if you look at remotes, you have master inside the origin folder. So that's one of the most important things to learn about Git. Whenever you point to a remote and whenever you do a git fetch, it is fetching, it is getting all the files with internal database inside the object, and it's taking all the files with the remote branches. So that means the remote repository, the origin, has a master branch that points to that specific commit. But I've still have no local branches. So the prefix origin / with my branch means that this is a branch that it's on my origin and it's not on my local Git repository. And how can I use this information? So why Git is taking this information from the master? So first of all, you need this to create a local branch that is tracking the remote branch. So if I issue git checkout master, a nice thing happens. Git create a new master branch on my local repository. So you see you have a master branch on my ref head, so it's a local branch. And since the name is the equal to a name of the branch on a remote repository, actually it is creating a setting that master and origin master were bound together. So it writes in a special file called the config. It's another file that is inside the .git folder. It is another file you're not supposed to modify manually, but it's interesting to look at to understand how Git works. So that's a configuration of this repository. You can see that you have remote origin, where remote is contained, and that's the URL for the origin, and that's the fetch of the origin. So it's telling to fetch everything. So whenever you get fetch from the origin, it fetch all the heads and all the remote origin heads. And then you have your local branch master, and it is bound to a remote called origin, and it merged on the ref has master. So that's where the master is, and that's the remote the origin master is tracking to. That's allow you to issue git push, and everything is up to date because I have nothing new commit on my master to push on remote master, and it's obvious because both the master, my local, and remote point to the very same repository, so I have nothing to push. But as you can see, I issue a smaller command than I've done in the past. Previously I've done git push origin master, so I needed to specify the origin then master. Now I can simply specify git push because in the config it is bound the master branch, it is bound to remote origin. So when I issue a git push, it takes the local branch master and it tries to push on the remote master. If I come back to my Linux machine, okay, and try to look at my config, you see that I have core option, the remote, and I have not the master section where I'm telling it that my local master point to the remote master. And that's the reason why if I issue git push specifying no remote, no branch, what I got is an error. The current branch master has no upstream branch, and that's a basic concept you need to understand. Usually, there is no way Git has a rule that specifies that a master branch or whatever branch you have locally must have a corresponding branch on a remote. It's just a convention. So the upstream branch represents the branch on the remote where this branch, local branch, is supposed to synchronize. Yes, I know. For the sake of simplicity, you usually use the same name with local and remote branches. And to do this, you can issue this kind of command, okay? And Git is suggesting you. And git push origin master, but it's adding set upstream, okay? So set upstream does nothing. Then you see in the config file, it wrote a setting that is telling getting tool master local branch will automatically be bound to a branch with a remote with the same name. So if I issue git push now, instead of having this error, it is reading the configuration and say, okay, if you issue a git push, I'm on the master, it's bound to the origin. So this means to Git that when you issue a git push, you're actually pushing on origin and the corresponding branch master. And that's everything you need to know now to work with remote. Just to recap everything, a remote is nothing else than a folder where you previously ran git init --bear. Cannot use as a standard Git repository. I cannot touch file inside, but I have a perfectly valid Git repository, so git log and other command works. Okay, so that's fundamentally true. And there is no server running, so everything is done by the client. When you do a git push or when you do a git fetch, it's the client that read a simple file, a simple folder on your disk, or a simple shared folder and do everything for you. There's no server. And it's the key concept you need to understand to better work with Git. There is no server. And that's all for this video. I'll wait you for the next video.